Before we begin this story, I want to know one thing. Where are you watching this video from right now? Write the name of your city and country in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories are reaching. And take this opportunity to subscribe to the channel. The iron gate creaked even before it was touched. Ethan Caldwell paused for a moment, observing the property before him. The Winchester mansion stood like a scar on the horizon, shrouded in a light mist that seemed never to completely dissipate. Even in the daylight, something was off about the place. It wasn't just the neglect nor the confusing architecture. It was the feeling that the house was watching. He pulled his cell phone from his pocket, checking once more the email that had brought him there. The proposal was too simple to ignore. Catalogue old documents and assess the historical value of the property. The payment, however, was absurdly high. Too high. Ethan had turned down odd jobs before, but this time his debts left no room for caution. With a push, the gate gave way. The sound echoed through the empty property. With each step along the stone path covered in dry leaves, Ethan noticed details that didn't add up. Windows partially open, as if someone had left in a hurry. Recent marks on the floor, even though the place had supposedly been closed for years. And most disturbing of all, faint lights flickering inside the house. When he reached the main door, he found it ajar. He did not hesitate. Upon entering, the air changed. Denser, colder. An old smell of damp wood and a somewhat metallic scent, almost imperceptible, lingered in the air. The interior of the mansion was a labyrinth. Stairs that led nowhere, doors that opened onto walls, hallways that seemed to fold back on themselves. Ethan had seen photos of the house, but being there was completely different. This wasn't just eccentric architecture, it seemed intentional, as if someone had built that to hide something, or someone. A dry sound came from upstairs. Ethan froze. He looked at the nearest staircase. Narrow, too steep, wrong. The sound did not repeat itself. Probably old wood, he thought, the house adjusting itself. Even so, it started to go up. Each step creaked under his weight. The feeling of being watched intensified with each step, as if something invisible were following his movement. At the top of the stairs, he found a narrow corridor lit by a single dim lamp. On the floor, drag marks. Recent. Ethan walked slowly. The markings led to a door at the end of the corridor. Unlike the others, it looked newer. Replaced. He turned the doorknob. Locked, but something caught his eye. A piece of paper stuck in the bottom crack of the door. He bent down and carefully pulled it out. It was an old document, yellowed, part of a financial record. Names, dates, values, and one detail that made her stomach churn: recurring payments, made decades after the official death of the beneficiaries. Ethan frowned. That didn't make sense. He put the paper in his pocket. That's when he heard footsteps behind him. Quick, heavy. He turned around immediately. Nothing. The hallway was empty, but the lamp began to flicker. 1, 2, 3 times. Until it completely fades away. Darkness took over the place. Ethan pulled out his cell phone, turning on the flashlight. The light revealed something that hadn't been there before. The marks on the ground had changed direction. Now they were bringing it to him. His heart raced. He took a step back. Other. The silence was absolute, but there was a presence there. He could feel it. Then, from the other side of the locked door, came a sound. A hit. Slow, deliberate. Ethan stood motionless. Another hit, this time stronger, and then a third. The doorknob started turning on its own. Ethan stepped back quickly, stumbling almost without realizing it. The door opened a few inches, revealing only darkness inside. But something came out. It wasn't visible. It made sense. An intense chill gripped the hallway, as if the air had been sucked out. Ethan ran. He went down the stairs without looking back, rushing through the main hall. When he reached the front door, he tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. Locked. He pulled hard. Nothing. He turned around. The house was different, darker, more alive. And then he realized something he hadn't noticed before. There were more footprints on the ground than when he entered. Much more. and none of them belonged to him. In the distance, a voice whispered, low, almost inaudible, but clear enough to be understood. You shouldn't have come. Ethan didn't sleep that night. Even after managing to leave the mansion, something he didn't remember exactly how it happened, the feeling that he had left something behind wouldn't leave him. Or worse, that something had left with him. The roadside motel where he stayed seemed too safe, too clean, too quiet. Every tiny sound, the creaking of wood, the hum of the air conditioner, made his body react as if he were still inside the mansion. On the small table in the room, the document he had found remained open. He had been staring at him for hours. The names listed there belonged to people who had been officially dead for decades. Some were former employees of the estate. Others were investors connected to the Winchester family. All, without exception, had payment records well beyond their dates of death. That wasn't just an administrative error. It was a pattern. Ethan opened his laptop and began cross-referencing information. Public records, old files, forgotten news. As he progressed, an invisible thread began to form. All the names were linked to a specific period, the last years of the mansion's active operation, when there were still rumors about constant renovations, unexplained expenses, and eccentric behavior on the part of the owners. But there was something more, something that did not appear in official documents. Ethan found an archived discussion on an old forum. Few replies, almost forgotten. An anonymous user mentioned silent payments made to keep something contained within the house, no details, without evidence. But now, with the document in hand, it no longer seemed like theory. One name repeatedly caught her attention: Margaret Hale. Unlike the others, there were more recent records about her, not financial ones, but accounts, small testimonies scattered across old blogs and obscure pages. Always with the same pattern, a woman who claimed to have worked at the mansion long after everyone believed it had been abandoned. Ethan found an address linked to the name. It was a few hours away. The next morning, he was already on the road. The town was small, one of those where everyone seems to know each other and where strangers are immediately noticed. Margaret Hale lived in a simple house, far from the center. The paint was faded. The garden was neglected. But there were clear signs that someone still lived there. Ethan knocked on the door. No response. He hit again. This time, slow footsteps approached. The door opened just enough to reveal an aged face with watchful and suspicious eyes. "You took your time," the woman said before Ethan could even speak. He frowned. "Excuse me. I think you're confusing me with someone else." "The house let you out," she interrupted, opening the door a little wider. "That's not normal." The silence that followed was heavy. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. "I found it there," he said, taking the document out of his pocket and showing it to her. Margaret's eyes changed immediately. It was no surprise. It was recognition. She opened the door completely. "Come in." The interior of the house was dark but organized. There were stacks of boxes, old papers, photographs. Everything seemed connected somehow. Margaret sat down slowly and gestured for Ethan to stand. "You've already realized that this isn't an ordinary house," she said, "but you still don't understand what it really is." Ethan did not respond. "They built that to survive," she continued, "not to live there." "They? Who?" Margaret looked directly at him. "People with enough money to hide their mistakes and enough fear to never stop them." She took the document from Ethan's hands and pointed to one of the names. These payments were not salaries. They were compensation. For what reason?" Margaret hesitated for a moment. "Because they stayed." Silence returned to fill the air. "The house," Ethan began, but stopped. He didn't know how to phrase the question. Margaret finished the sentence for him. "He's taking it at home." The words were spoken with an unsettling calm. "Not physically. At least not at first. It confuses, isolates, distorts. People get in, and little by little, they can no longer get out. And when they do manage to get out, they are no longer the same. Ethan felt the weight of it. And what about the payments? To ensure that no one spoke, and to keep enough people inside, feeding whatever exists within that structure. Ethan took a step back. That doesn't make sense. You don't have to, Margaret replied. It just has to be real. She stood up with difficulty and walked to a bookshelf. She picked up an old photograph and handed it to him. It was the mansion, but different, less deteriorated, and with people, many people. Some were smiling, others don't. I worked there, Margaret said. I was one of the last ones. Ethan looked at the photo again. What happened to the others? Margaret took a while to reply. When she spoke, her voice was lower. Some left, and the others? She stared at Ethan, expressionless. They're still there. A heavy silence filled the room. Ethan clutched the photograph tightly in his hands. That door upstairs, he said slowly. What's in there? Margaret did not respond immediately. His eyes darted away for a moment as if he were considering whether or not he should continue. When she looked at him again, there was something different in her expression. Something more serious, most urgent. Did you open it? No. She took a deep breath. So there's still time. Ethan felt his heart race. Time for what? Margaret took a step towards him. So I don't have to come back. The silence that followed was broken by something unexpected. Ethan's cell phone vibrated. He looked at the screen. A new message. No number, no identification, just one sentence. The door is still open. Ethan did not reply to the message, but he couldn't ignore it either. The phone was still in his hand when he slowly raised his eyes toward Margaret. She was watching the screen from a distance, as if she already knew exactly what was written. She called you back, he said with an unsettling calm. Her? Ethan asked, trying to remain rational. At home. A heavy silence fell between the two. Ethan put his cell phone in his pocket, as if that could ward off whatever was happening. That proves nothing, he said, more to himself than to Margaret. It could be someone playing a trick on me, someone who knows I was there. Margaret did not react. Then why now? He insisted. Why send this right after I left? Because you took something, she replied. Ethan froze for a second. Instinctively, he touched the pocket where the document was kept. This paper? It's just an old record. No, Margaret said firmly. It's not just that. This is part of a system, a living record. Everything connected to the house remains connected, even outside of it. Ethan took a step back. That's impossible. You've been in there, she retorted. You know that impossible doesn't apply. The words hung in the air. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to organize his thoughts, but there was something that bothered him more than the message. The marks on the floor, changing direction, following him. Those, he began, the footprints, they weren't normal. Margaret nodded slowly. They never are. There were so many, as if the house were full, she added. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. But there was nobody there. Margaret did not respond. Silence was enough. Ethan looked at her again. You said that some people are still there. Yes. Then why didn't I see anyone? Margaret hesitated. Because not everyone wants to be seen. A shiver ran through Ethan's body. He began pacing restlessly around the small room. This doesn't make sense. If there are people inside, why didn't anyone do anything? Why has this never come to light? Margaret let out a soft sigh. They've already tried. She walked over to one of the boxes and opened it, revealing a stack of old newspapers. He picked up a few and spread them out on the table. Ethan approached. Headlines: Investigator disappears after visiting historic property. Architect abandons project and recounts inexplicable experience. Family sues state for negligence in disappearance case. Everyone went there, Margaret said. Everyone believed they could understand or solve it. And what happened? Some have gone mad. She pointed to another headline. Others disappeared. Ethan swallowed hard. And what about those who left? Margaret looked directly at him. They're back. The weight of those words was immediate. Ethan felt his stomach churn. I'm not coming back. Margaret did not respond. That annoyed him. I'm not going, he repeated louder. You're coming back soon, she said calmly. Ethan stopped. What are you talking about? From the moment you left, Margaret explained, you haven't stopped thinking about the house, the hallways, the door. What's behind it? Ethan remained silent. She continued. That's part of it. The house doesn't have to lock you inside. It makes you want to come back. Ethan ran a hand over his face, frustrated. It's psychological, that's all. An unfamiliar environment, stress, suggestion. Then throw away the document, Margaret interrupted. Ethan looked at her. If it's just psychological, you don't need it. The challenge remained unresolved. This is it. Heavy. Ethan hesitated. For a few seconds, he really considered it. But his hand did not move. Margaret realized. This is how it begins. The phone vibrated again. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment before looking. Another message. You left something behind. His heart raced. I didn't leave anything behind, he murmured. Margaret approached. Yes, he did. What? She stared intently at him. Your departure. Ethan frowned. That doesn't make sense. No one ever leaves completely, she said. There's always a part left, and it's that part that the house uses to pull you back in. Ethan began to feel something different. It wasn't just fear. It was restlessness, an unsettling feeling of incompleteness, as if something was truly missing. He tried to ignore it, but then an image appeared in his mind. A porter, no corridor, the doorknob turning, darkness behind her. And the certainty that something almost happened. Almost. He opened his eyes quickly. That door, he said, almost without realizing it. Margaret said nothing. I need to know what's in there. The silence that followed was the confirmation he needed. Margaret looked away. So you've already decided? No, Ethan replied too quickly. I just need to understand. This isn't about going back. It's about finishing what I started. Margaret let out a soft, humorless laugh. Everyone says that. Ethan ignoro. If I find out what's going on, I can put an end to it. You're not dealing with something that can end, she said. But Ethan wasn't listening at all anymore. His mind was fixated on a single point, at the door. What was behind her? The feeling that the answer was right there, waiting. If I go, he said, will you come with me? Margaret froze. For a moment it seemed like he would say no, but then something in his expression changed. Tiredness. Perhaps guilt. I never really left, she said quietly. Ethan realized she was still in prison as well. So you understand. Margaret closed her eyes for a moment. When it opened, there was a decision to be made. If you come back, she said, we can't make the same mistakes. What mistakes? She replied without hesitation, thinking that we are in control. The phone vibrated again. Ethan looked. The third message, shorter, more direct. We are waiting. He slowly raised his eyes, and for the first time since leaving the mansion, he didn't feel like running away. He felt the urge to return. The road back looked different. Ethan drove in silence, while Margaret watched out the window, as if each mile traveled was a return to something she had never truly been able to let go of. The sky was beginning to darken, even though it was still late afternoon, and heavy clouds gathered like a silent warning. Neither of them commented, but they both knew. Returning to the mansion wasn't just a choice, it was a consequence. Don't go straight in, Margaret said, breaking the silence for the first time since they left. The house senses when you're anxious. Ethan let out a soft sigh. How exactly does a house perceive anything? Margaret did not respond immediately. Because it's not just a house. Ethan gripped the steering wheel. He had heard that before, but now. It seemed harder to ignore. When the silhouette of the mansion reappeared on the horizon, something changed within him. That feeling of incompleteness that had accompanied him since he left began to diminish, as if he were getting closer to something that was missing, Margaret realized. "You can feel it, can't you?" Ethan did not respond. It wasn't necessary. Upon parking, they both remained inside the car for a few seconds. The house seemed darker than before. The windows reflected the overcast sky like opaque eyes. "Before you go in," Margaret said, "there's something you need to understand." Ethan looked at her. "That door, it's not the beginning. So what is it?" "It's the end of something that began long before you arrived." She opened the car door. "And if we don't understand this, we're not going out." They walked to the mansion. This time the main door was wide open, as if he were waiting. Subplot 1. The Hidden Records. As soon as they entered, Margaret led Ethan directly to an area he hadn't explored before, a side corridor partially hidden behind a displaced bookcase. "Not everything in the house was made to confuse," she said. "Some things were made to hide." The corridor led to a small, windowless room. In the center, a table, and about it, old metal boxes. Ethan approached and opened one of them. Inside, there were tapes, documents, photographs, and recordings. "They documented everything," Margaret said. "Every person who came in, every strange behavior, every change." Ethan picked up one of the tapes, which was labeled with a date. "This is recent." Margaret nodded. "More recent than it should be." Ethan found a small recorder nearby and, hesitating for a moment, pressed play. A hissing sound. Then, a male voice. "Day 14. We still haven't found the original exit. The stairs have moved again. 2 people disappeared today. There was no sound. There was no struggle. They just vanished." Ethan switched tapes. Another voice, more nervous. "We are being watched. It's not paranoia. The walls react. I swear I saw a door appear where there was nothing before." He hung up. The silence that followed was suffocating. "This isn't old news," Ethan said. "This was happening until recently." "It never stopped," Margaret replied. Subplot 2. Margaret's past. Ethan turned to her. "You knew all of this, and you never told me?" Margaret took a deep breath. "I tried to forget. This is not something one forgets. That's exactly why people try." She walked over to one of the walls and lightly touched the wood. "I didn't go in alone back then." Ethan frowned. "Who was with you?" Margaret took a while to reply. "My brother." The weight of the revelation was immediate. "Did he leave?" Margaret did not respond. Ethan understood. "Is he still here?" "I don't know," she said, her voice lower. "Sometimes I think so. Other times I think the house just wants me to believe that." Ethan noticed something new there. "It wasn't just fear. It was my fault. And you came back because of him." Margaret nodded slowly. "I never stopped searching." Subplot 3. The Living Structure. A noise echoed down the hallway. They both froze. It wasn't the same kind of sound as before. It was mechanical, like old gears turning. The house was changing. Ethan ran to the hallway through which they had entered. It stopped abruptly. "It's not possible." The path had disappeared. In its place there was now a continuous wall. No marks, no opening. Margaret closed her eyes for a moment. "It has already begun." "What?" "She knows we're back together." The air felt heavier, denser. Ethan looked around. "This is some kind of hidden mechanism." But before he could finish, the ground beneath his feet creaked and slightly tilted, as if the house were adjusting itself, breathing. "It's not mechanical," Margaret said. "It never was." Ethan tried to stay in control. "So there is a logic to it. There has to be. None of this happens without a pattern." "There is a pattern," she said. "Which?" Margaret looked directly at him. "You." Silence fell immediately. "What do you mean by that?" "The house reacts to people, to fears, to intentions. The more you try to control it, the more it changes." Ethan began to understand. So she's testing, or by feeding? A new sound echoed, this time closer, steps. Ethan and Margaret exchanged a look. They were not alone. But this time, it didn't just seem like an invisible presence. Something moved at the end of the newly formed corridor. A silhouette. Quick, it disappeared before they could see clearly. "Did you see that?" Ethan whispered. Margaret nodded. Her face had lost its color. Not everyone who is here has forgotten how to show up. Ethan's heart raced. Was that a person? Margaret took a while to reply. When he spoke, his voice was almost a whisper. "It's over." A metallic sound echoed behind them. They both turned around. A new door had appeared in the wall. Old. Different. It's familiar. Ethan felt his stomach clench. It's her. The same door. The one upstairs. Now there. In front of them. The doorknob. Turned slowly. Alone. And this time, the door began to open completely. The door opened completely. Without resistance. The darkness on the other side was not like the absence of ordinary light. It was dense, almost solid, as if it had its own depth. Ethan didn't move immediately. Something inside him screamed at him to retreat. But another part, stronger now, was pulling him forward. Margaret held his arm. "If you go in, don't trust what you see." Ethan looked at her. "And what do I trust?" Margaret hesitated for a second. "In what doesn't change?" He frowned, but didn't have time to ask anything else. The air around the door began to distort slightly, as if the space there were unstable. "She's not going to wait," Margaret said. Ethan took a deep breath, and he took the first step. As soon as he walked through the door, the world changed. There was no more hallway, not even a house, not even a recognizable structure. He was in a vast but undefined space. The walls seemed to exist and not exist at the same time, moving slowly, as if breathing. The ground was uneven, like overlapping layers of wood, stone, and something else Ethan couldn't identify. Margaret entered behind him. The door disappeared, without leaving a trace. "Great," Ethan murmured. "No turning back." Margaret did not respond. She was looking around with extreme attention. "This isn't the house," she said. "It's the core." Ethan swallowed hard. Core of what? Before she could answer, a sound echoed, a voice. But it didn't come from a specific point. It seemed to be everywhere. "You took too long." Ethan turned quickly. "Who's there?" Silence. Then steps began to emerge, not from a single place, but of several. Ahead of them, shapes began to slowly materialize, shadows, then outlines, and then people, several, stops, observing. Ethan felt his body freeze. "They are," he began, but couldn't finish. Margaret stepped forward. Some of them, the figures weren't normal. His movements were slow, imprecise, as if they were out of sync with his own body. His eyes empty, but attentive, and then one of them moved faster. He approached. Ethan recognized something. The clothes, the style. It was from another era. "They're trapped here," he whispered. "Yes," said Margaret, "but not in the way you think." One of the figures stopped a few meters from them. His head tilted slightly, as if analyzing. Then he spoke, with difficulty, as if he hadn't used his voice in a long time. "You brought back." Ethan took a step back. "I didn't bring anyone." The figure slowly raised its arm and pointed at him. "I brought her." The air got colder. Ethan felt something in his pocket. The document. He pulled slowly. The paper was different. The lyrics had changed. Now, in place of the old names, there was only one, his, and below. "A new line is being written. Alone, like ink appearing out of nowhere. Margaret Widow." His face changed completely. "No," he murmured. Ethan felt his heart race. "What is happening?" She took a step back. "You didn't just bring the document." Silence fell like a blade. "You brought the bond." Ethan stood motionless. "That doesn't make sense." "Do it," she said urgently. They weren't paying those people to stay. She pointed to the figures around her. They were being paid to replace them. The world seemed to stop for a second. Ethan felt the weight of it all fall upon him. No, the house needs continuity, Margaret continued. When someone leaves, someone else needs to take their place. Ethan shook his head. I left. Margaret stared at him. Do you really think it's gone? The figures began to move slowly around them, searching. Ethan looked at the document again. His name was now complete. And below, another line was beginning to emerge. A new name, still incomplete. No, that's not happening. Margaret began to back away. I tried to warn you, Ethan realized. Wait, what do you mean by that? She didn't answer immediately. His eyes were fixed on the document. When I left, she said slowly, someone took my place. Ethan felt an intense chill. Who? Margaret finally looked at him, and for the first time, there was something cruel in his expression. No malice intended, but acceptance. You. Silence exploded within him. That's impossible. I wasn't even there. Not yet, she said. The pieces started to fall into place. The messages, the feeling of incompleteness, the need to return. Did you know? Ethan said, his voice almost silent. Margaret did not deny it. I needed someone to come back with me. The figures were closer now, almost within reach. So all this, Ethan breathed heavily, was to bring me here? It was to get me out of there. The revelation came as a shock. Ethan stepped back, but there was nowhere to go. The space around them seemed to be slowly closing in. The figures began to extend their hands. No, no, he murmured. Margaret took another step back. I'm very sorry. And then she stopped. The figures didn't touch her. They did not follow her. They were all focused on him. Ethan realized. You've already been replaced. Margaret nodded. Now it's your turn. The document in his hand burned, but not with fire. It's cold. The letters disappeared and they reappeared on the surrounding walls. Repeated, hundreds of times. His name, and then the voice returned. Clearer, closer, balance restored. Ethan tried to run, but the ground beneath their feet gave way, not like a fall, but like a slow sinking. The figures moved forward, and for the first time, they touched him. And the worst part wasn't the touching, it was a sensation, recognition, as if he had always belonged there. The touch wasn't violent, it was inevitable. The hands that gripped Ethan lacked strength, at least not physical strength. Still, he couldn't break free. It was like trying to fight something that didn't fully exist, but that also couldn't be ignored. The ground continued to give way beneath his feet, slowly, like invisible quicksand. No! No! He screamed, trying to grab onto anything, but there was nothing solid enough. The figures surrounded him now, very close. Their faces were beginning to take shape, not completely human, not completely empty. And then came the worst. They were conscious, imprisoned but conscious. One of them, an older man, came closer than the others. His eyes met Ethan's, and for a brief moment, lucidity. Don't fight it, he whispered with difficulty. It only makes it worse. Ethan tried to back away. Get me out of here, he pleaded. You know how to get out. The man did not answer. Clarity vanished. The face went blank again. Ethan felt his body sink down to his knees. The cold was rising. It wasn't just the temperature. It was absence. As if parts of him were being removed, deleted, outside. Margaret was watching. Stop! Property! Her expression was not one of relief, not even complete guilt. It was something more complex, a mixture of liberation and emptiness. The surrounding area began to change. The walls came back, the ground stabilized, that core disappeared, and with him, Ethan. But before everything completely shut down, something happened. Ethan stopped resisting, not by choice, but because he realized something. The figures weren't just holding on, they were repeating it, movements, gestures, standards like echoes. He forced his gaze around. He observed and he saw. Each of them seemed trapped in a cycle, small actions repeating themselves, steps, gazes, attempts, failures. It was as if each person there was reliving the moment they tried to escape. And then he understood. "It's not a prison," he murmured, almost breathless. The figures continued. "It's a record." One of them slowly turned her face towards him, as if he had heard. Ethan felt something change. "The house doesn't hold people captive," he continued, forcing his mind to work. "It holds captive versions of them." The atmosphere vibrated slightly. Margaret, on the other side, realized. "What are you doing?" she whispered. "Ethan Ignoru. The payments," he continued even as he sank, "weren't to keep people there." His eyes widened. "They were meant to keep the system running." The figures began to slow down. One of them stopped completely. Silence has changed its nature. Something was listening. Margaret stepped forward. "Ethan Para!" But he didn't stop. "If this is a record," he said, now more clearly, "then it can be altered." The ground stopped giving way. For a second, just one. But it was enough. Ethan forced his body forward. One of the figures tried to grab him again, but this time there was resistance. Real. He pulled his arm forcefully, and he succeeded. A small movement, but impossible until then. Margaret's eyes widened. "That's not possible." "They're not holding me back," Ethan said, breathless. "They're repeating what already happened." The figures began to fall apart. Their movements were out of sync, like a system failing. Then the voice returned. Different, less controlled. Interference detected. The space around them trembled, stronger now. The walls appeared and disappeared quickly. The ground was giving way again, but in an unstable way. "You shouldn't have understood," Margaret said, almost in a panic. "This has never happened before." Ethan stood up with difficulty, still partially imprisoned, but not completely. "Because nobody tried to change it," he replied. He looked directly at Margaret. "You just wanted to go out." She remained silent. "But I'm going to finish this." The words echoed, and this time, it wasn't just the house that listened. The figures around them stopped, one by one, slowly, and then they all looked at him, not like before, not like predators, but as something different. Expectation. The system had been broken, or at least shaken, but this brought something worse. Stability has disappeared, and when that happened, something new began to emerge. Not a figure, not a person, but a presence. Much bigger, much older. Ethan heard before he saw, an overwhelming pressure, as if space itself were turning against him. The voice returned, now distorted, irritated. "Correction needed." Margaret took a step back. For the first time, I was genuinely scared. "Ethan," she said, "you didn't open a way out." The air grew heavier, darker. "You opened something worse." The ground cracked, not down, but inside, as if revealing something that was hidden beneath everything. And for the first time, Ethan realized. The house wasn't the problem. It was just on the surface. Space no longer obeyed any recognizable logic. The fragmented floor revealed layers that shouldn't exist. Wood over stone, stone over emptiness, emptiness over something pulsating. The walls appeared and disappeared in chaotic patterns, as if the structure itself were trying to recompose itself and failing. Ethan was standing, but not completely free. His feet were still partially trapped in that unstable substance, as if the place was still trying to reclaim him. The pressure was mounting. The presence emerging from beneath the house was not something that could be fully seen, only felt, ancient, calculated, and now attentive. Margaret was backing away. Each step she took seemed lighter, more relaxed, as if the connection to that place was truly fading. "You need to stop!" she shouted. "This is not something that can be dealt with." Ethan did not respond immediately. He was looking around, observing. Unlike before, Before, he reacted. Now, he was analyzing. The figures were still there, but they didn't touch him anymore. They were watching. They were waiting. "It's not about confronting," Ethan said finally. "It's about understanding." The person below reacted. The ground vibrated. Persistent error. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. He took a deep breath. And then he started walking, with difficulty, but walking. Each step seemed to require an absurd effort, as if it were going against an invisible force. But he continued. "Everything here works like a system," he said, more to himself than to Margaret. "Input, registration, replacement, balance." He looked at one of the figures. "You're not under arrest." The figure tilted its head slightly. "They are repeating it. One more step." The ground tried to pull him down again. He resisted. "And I would be too, if I continued fighting in the same way." Margaret watched without fully understanding. "Ethan, this won't get you out of here." He looked at her. Calm. "Different. I'm not trying to leave." Silence fell immediately. "So what are you doing?" she shouted. Ethan turned his gaze to the unstable space around him. "I'm changing the way this reads me." The presence reacted again, stronger. The walls warped violently. "Unauthorized diversion," Ethan ignored. "If this is a system," he continued, "then it depends on predictable patterns." He looked at his own hands, still partially fading. Fear, flight, resistance. One more step, firmer. Everyone who came before did that. The figures around them began to move, but not to attack him, to accompany, slowly. "Then I'm not going to do it." Margaret's eyes widened. "You've gone mad." Ethan let out a soft sigh. "No." He took another step. "Now it's easier. I finally understand." The space around them slowed down. For a brief moment, the process is compromised. His voice was failing. Ethan continued. "This isn't meant to destroy anyone." He looked at the open ground, whatever was underneath. "He wants to keep everything running. One more step, now completely free from the ground." The figures stopped, observing. "And I am just another variable." Margaret felt something change. "Ethan," but he didn't look at her. "So I'm not going to fight the system." He raised his head. "I'm going to become useless to him." The silence was absolute. Even his presence seemed to hesitate. Error, undefined. Ethan slowly opened his arms, not in surrender, but in acceptance. "I'm not going to run away. I won't resist. I'm not going to try to leave." Each word seemed to weaken the atmosphere. The walls were shaking, falling apart. "If there is no conflict, there is no standard." The voice failed, stronger now. Structural failure. The figures around them began to change. His movements ceased completely. For the first time, they stopped repeating it. Ethan took another step, now light, natural. What if there's no pattern? He stared directly into the void below. There is no control. The presence reacted violently. The ground opened up even wider. The space was collapsing, but not about Ethan, around him, as if I were losing my bearings. Margaret fell to her knees. No, that's not possible." Ethan remained standing, intact. "You tried to escape," he said, looking at her, "but you kept playing by the rules." She stared at him. No response. "I'm not going to play." The silence that followed was unlike any other. It wasn't empty. It was a lack of control, and it was something that place had never faced before. The presence attempted to recover. One last time. Correction. Final. But the voice cracked halfway through, like a system without reference. No pattern, no response. And then it stopped. The figures around them began to disappear. Not like before, not being pulled, but they're free, one by one. "I am here, without resistance." Margaret watched, unable to move. "They are going." Ethan did not respond. He was staring into the space ahead of him. Something was beginning to take shape, not a way out, but it's a choice, and for the first time since he went in there, he really did have one. The silence that followed brought no relief. It brought uncertainty. The surrounding space was no longer collapsing aggressively, but it hadn't completely stabilized either. It was like a system in a critical state, not functioning, but not shut down either. Ethan remained motionless. Before him, what had previously seemed like mere distortion began to take shape. It wasn't exactly a door, not a single path. It was an opening, irregular, unstable, as if it were being created in real time. Margaret stood up slowly behind him, still trying to comprehend what had just happened. "What is this?" she asked, her voice weak. Ethan replied without looking away, "An exit, or a reset." The word echoed strangely, as if the place itself had reacted to her. Margaret stepped forward. "And what's the difference?" Ethan took a few seconds to respond. "I think it depends on how we get through it." Silence returned, but this time, it's filled with urgency. Margaret looked around. The figures had almost completely disappeared, but not all of them. One still remained. Stop. Further away. Property. Unlike the others, Ethan realized. "Did you see?" Margaret was already looking. His body stiffened. "It can't be." She began to walk slowly towards the figure. Hesitation and hope. "Margaret," Ethan called. "Wait." But she didn't stop. The figure did not move. I was just watching. When Margaret finally got close enough, her breath caught in her throat. "Daniel!" The figure tilted its head slightly. The eyes, they weren't completely human yet, but there was something there, something that wasn't in the others. Recognition. Ethan approached cautiously. "This is my brother," she replied almost voicelessly. The air around seemed to contract. The presence, even weakened, was still there, observing, waiting. "He wasn't released," Ethan said. Margaret extended her hand. "Daniel, it's me." The figure did not back down, but he didn't answer either. He just stayed there, trapped, at an impasse. "Why?" she asked desperately. "Why didn't he leave like the others?" Ethan analyzed it quickly. He looked around, then for the unstable opening, and then he understood. "Because he wasn't completely replaced." Margaret turned to him. "What does that mean?" "You mean, when you left," Ethan said, "the system didn't finish the process." She froze. "You took his place," Ethan continued, "but you didn't make it all the way." The weight of it all fell on her, so he was stuck between two states. Ethan nodded. Neither inside nor outside. Margaret looked at her brother again. "I can bring him with me." "No," Ethan said firmly. She turned around, annoyed. "I'm not leaving him here. If you try to remove it now," Ethan pointed to the unstable space, "you could reset everything." The silence was brutal. Margaret looked between Ethan, the opening, and her brother. An impossible decision. Final pressure. The opening began to contract, slowly but visibly. "It's closing," said Margaret. Ethan nodded. "The system is still trying to correct itself." A vibration ran through the room, weaker than before, but growing. "We don't have much time." Margaret was breathing rapidly. "I'm not going out without him." Ethan looked at the figure, then for her. "Then you need to decide quickly." The surrounding area began to emit sounds again, not like before, but like something restarting. "Partial reconfiguration." The voice was weaker, but getting back to the point. Ethan clenched his teeth. "If this restarts completely, everything will come back." Margaret clenched her fists. "I can't abandon him again." Ethan took a step closer to her. "And if you stay, nobody leaves." The conflict was there, of course, irreversible. The choice. Margaret approached her brother once more. His eyes were filled with tears, but his expression firm. "I promised I would come back for you." The figure did not respond, but a small movement occurred, almost imperceptible. His fingers trembled. Margaret Widow. And that almost broke everything. She reached out her hand once more. It stopped, just centimeters away, and then he retreated, in pain, slowly, but decisively. "I'm very sorry." Ethan watched in silence. The opening was smaller now, much smaller. "Let's go," he said. Margaret gave her brother one last look, and he ran. Race against collapse. The space began to shake more intensely. The walls reappeared. The ground was rearranging itself, but in the wrong way. Unstable, as if the system were trying to regain control by force. Ethan and Margaret ran. The opening pulsed ahead, decreasing. "Faster!" The sound of the voice grew louder, fragmented. "Correction. In progress. Retention. Necessary." The ground behind them began to close in, like a wound healing. Too fast. Margaret tripped. Ethan pulled her. "Get up!" They ran faster. The opening was now just wide enough for one person to pass through at a time. "Go!" shouted Ethan. "No! Now!" Margaret hesitated for a second, but he got in. It disappeared on the other side. Ethan turned it around. For a moment. He looked back. The space is now almost completely closed, but something caught his attention. The figure, Margaret's brother, still there, stopped, but now looking directly at him, and for the first time, fully conscious. And then Ethan made a decision. Ethan did not cross. He stopped, just steps from the opening. The surrounding noise grew louder, the structure collapsing and rebuilding itself simultaneously, like a malfunctioning system desperately trying to stabilize itself. But he didn't move. His eyes were fixed on the figure in the background, Daniel, still there, still conscious, and for the first time, different. There was no emptiness in his eyes anymore. There was understanding, and something more. Notice. "You can't just go out like that," Ethan said in a low voice, as if speaking more to himself. The opening behind him pulsed, almost closing. The distorted voice echoed even louder. "Correction, final, necessary." Ethan took a deep breath, and he returned. Each step toward Daniel caused the space to react violently. The ground was breaking apart beneath his feet. The walls closed in at impossible angles. But he continued. "If I leave now," he murmured, "this will continue." Daniel didn't move, but his eyes followed Ethan. "And someone will come back. One more step, more difficult. And it all starts again." The opening behind him was now minimal. A final pulse, and it almost disappeared. Margaret on the other side shouted. But his voice no longer reached him. Ethan stopped in front of Daniel, just a few centimeters away. The air there was colder, denser. "You understand, don't you?" Ethan said. Daniel blinked slowly. A simple gesture, but full of meaning. "Try." Ethan nodded. "So it's not about leaving." The space vibrated with force. Mistakes. Irreversible. The walls began to close in completely. There was no way out in sight anymore. "It's about stopping this." Ethan looked around. Now he could see clearly. That was more than just a system. It was a closed cycle. Prohibited, record, replacement, restart. And the mistake has always been the same. People were trying to leave. They never tried to break the cycle. Ethan pulled the document out of his pocket. Still there, but different again. Now there were no names, just lines, blank, waiting. "This here," he said, "is the core of the record." Daniel was watching. "Property, but be careful. And as long as this exists," Ethan continued, "the cycle continues." The voice reacted, more aggressive. "Protection, activated." The surrounding space began to collapse faster. Parts of the environment simply disappeared. Others sprang up in their place, unstable, chaotic. "I can't go out with this," Ethan said. He looked at Daniel. "And you can't either." Silence. "But maybe we can do something else." Daniel tilted his head slightly. waiting. Ethan tore up the document. The sound was wrong, not like paper, but it's like something deeper being divided. The reaction was immediate. The entire space shook. Violently, the voice screamed, no more mechanics, but desperate. Total failure. The walls began to crumble, don't collapse, but to disappear, as if they had never existed. The ground opened up completely, revealing nothing, an absolute void. Daniel staggered, for the first time, unstable. Ethan held him. Now. But there was no way out. There was no door. There was no structure, just a fall. And then it happened. The figures began to reappear, but different, not repeating, not prisoners, confused, books, one by one, disappearing, as if they were finally freed. The system was breaking down. In truth, but there was a cost. Ethan sensed it first. Your body is failing. Not physically, but existentially, as if it were being removed. That makes sense, he murmured with a slight smile. Daniel held him now. Firmer, more realistic. You, he tried to say, but the voice failed. Ethan looked at him. You can leave now. Daniel hesitated. Or, the surrounding space no longer existed, just fragments. It's empty. Daniel looked at Ethan for a long second. And then he nodded, and it disappeared. Ethan was left alone, or almost. The presence was still there, but weakened, disconnected, without structure, no system, out of control. Why? The voice now was no longer threatening. It was confusing. Ethan looked around. For nothing, because nobody ever tried to stop it. He took a deep breath, feeling everything disappear. They were just trying to leave. The final silence came. Full. Outside. Margaret fell to the ground while crossing the street, gasping for air. Desperate. She turned around immediately. The opening behind her, they disappeared, without leaving a trace. No! The scream echoed through the mansion, but there was no response. And then, something has changed. The house stopped. The silence that took over the place was different. There was no more movement. There was no longer any presence. There was nothing left. Margaret stood up slowly. My heart was still racing, without fully understanding, but feeling it. Something had ended outside. The sky was beginning to lighten. For the first time, for a long time, the mansion never seemed so ordinary. Margaret stood in the center of the main hall for several minutes, trying to make sense of the silence around her. There were no more creaks out of place, no subtle changes in the walls, nor that constant feeling of being watched. It was just a house. Old, empty, dead. She took a few slow steps, almost fearing that everything would return to normal at any moment. But nothing happened. The stairs remained in place. The doors led where they should. The corridors ended where expected. Everything was normal, and that, somehow, was more disturbing than before. Margaret walked to the front door and opened it. Without resistance, effortless, daylight streamed in for the first time without appearing distorted. She left, and there was nothing trying to stop her. Outside, the air felt different, lighter, real. Margaret took a deep breath as if she were doing so for the first time in years. She looked back. The Winchester mansion still stood there, impressive but empty. No presence, unintentionally, lifeless. Days passed. Margaret did not return home immediately. She needed to be sure. He returned to the property several times, always hoping to find some sign that it wasn't completely over, but he never found it. No change, no sound, no shadow. The house remained still, silent, like any other abandoned building. But the world around us began to respond. Ancient accounts began to make sense. Closed missing persons cases have been reopened. People who had been presumed dead have started to be found, confused, disoriented, but alive. Some didn't know how much time had passed. Others remembered everything. Margaret avoided those people at first. Not because I'm afraid of them, but what could they say or ask? Until he couldn't anymore. One morning, she went to a hospital where some of the survivors were being treated. He observed from a distance, without getting closer, without identifying themselves, and then it saw Daniel, seated, in silence, the lost gaze, but present, vivo. Margaret felt her body freeze. My legs almost gave way. She didn't come closer, not at that moment. He simply observed. Silent tears streamed down her face, but she made no sound. He was free. It was enough. As the weeks went by, the story began to circulate in a fragmented way, without clear explanations. The mansion has been cordoned off by authorities and is now treated solely as a potentially dangerous historical site. No official explanation was given. None of them ever would be. Margaret returned one last time. He stood before the property, observing in silence, without fear, weightless, just closure. "You did it," he murmured almost voicelessly. The wind passed gently, no response. But it wasn't necessary. She never told the whole truth. Not bad, Daniel. Not for anyone. Because there weren't enough words, and perhaps there shouldn't even be one. Months later, the mansion was put up for sale. Without fanfare, nothing special, like any other old property. But there was a difference. This time, no one showed any interest. And for the first time, the silence of that place hid nothing, or at least, that's what it seemed like. Months later, an envelope with no return address arrived discreetly at Margaret's house. She hesitated before opening it. Inside, there was only one leaf, white, no text, no names, no marks. But when you turned the paper up to the light, something appeared. For a brief moment, almost imperceptible, a single line being written slowly, like before. Margaret dropped the paper. My heart raced. She looked out the window. In the distance, the mansion remained motionless, silent, untouched. But at that moment, she was certain of something. The system had not been destroyed, just rewritten. And now tell me, would you have the courage to enter that mansion knowing all of this? Or worse, leave without knowing what you left behind? Stories like this make us think. To what extent are we really in control of our choices? And when do we start doing exactly what something or someone wants? If this story has captivated you so far, leave a comment telling us what you would do in Ethan's place. Would you try to escape, or would you face the unknown to the end? And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because the next story might be even more disturbing. And who knows? Perhaps it will begin exactly where this one ended.